Okay, welcome to the deep dive. We take your sources, we dig into the details, and we pull out those key insights you need.
Exactly, helping you navigate these often complex topics.
And today, we're really plunging into something fascinating and, well, maybe a bit tense. It's this intersection of South African economic policy, pressure from the United States, and the interests of global big tech.
Specifically looking at Elon Musk's Starlink, right?
That's the one. So our mission here is to unpack the most important bits from this transcript. We want to understand the history behind it all.
Explore the different perspectives the source brings up.
And see what this whole situation might signal, for bigger trends, not just in South Africa, but maybe across the continent too.
Okay. Should be interesting. The source apparently has some surprising connections.
Get ready. Let's start with a pretty striking statement the transcript highlights. It's from South Africa's finance minister, Enoch Godongwana.
Okay, what did he say?
He said, and this is a direct quote according to the source, "If you disagree with the Americans, life becomes difficult in dealing with anybody. No one wants to touch you."
Wow. That's quite blunt.
Very. And the source points out this wasn't just some theoretical comment. He apparently said this just days after a White House meeting.
A meeting between who?
South African President Ramaphosa and then President Trump. And the source describes that meeting as, well, pretty tense.
Okay. So the timing is key.
Exactly. And according to this transcript, right after that meeting, South Africa started proposing some policy shifts.
Just aimed at what?
Well, the source suggests they were trying to stabilize the U.S. relationship, and the source puts it this way, appeasing both Trump and Elon Musk.
Interesting connection there. What kind of shifts are we talking about?
The source details a few specific proposals. For instance, importing $1 billion worth of U.S. liquefied natural gas, LNG, every year.
$1 billion. Okay, that's significant.
Yeah. And also seeking duty-free access for key South African exports, steel, aluminum, vehicles into the U.S. market.
Standard trade negotiation points, perhaps?
Maybe, but then there's this other point the source makes. Reportedly, South Africa also toned down its criticism of Israel.
Despite their ICJ case against Israel, the genocide case.
Precisely. The source says insiders frame this as a calculated move, an effort to realign with U.S. interests.
So if you take all that together, what's the source's take?
The observation from the source is that this looks pretty one-sided, like South Africa is doing most of the bending.
Not much of a mutual negotiation then.
Doesn't seem like it. Based on the transcript, Washington reportedly wasn't really budging or offering major concessions in return.
Okay, so where does Starlink fit into this picture?
Right, this is where it gets really, really interesting. Our source zeroes in on one specific flashpoint mention, Elon Musk's Starlink being blocked in South Africa.
Blocked? Why?
The core reason, according to our source, South Africa's Black Economic Empowerment laws, the BEE laws.
Okay, can you unpack that a bit? What do the BEE laws require?
Yeah, so the key requirement here, as explained in the source, any foreign company operating in South Africa needs to have 30% local Black ownership in its South African subsidiary.
30% local Black ownership, and that's mandatory.
The transcript stresses, yeah, this isn't a suggestion, it's the law.
And Musk's position?
The source states he refused to comply, flat out, and apparently publicly called the laws discriminatory.
Right, so that refusal leads to the block.
Exactly. And that brings us to this proposed policy shift the transcript details. The government there has proposed exempting foreign tech companies like Starlink from that 30% equity rule.
Exempting them how? What's the alternative?
They're offering something called alternative compliance.
Okay, alternative compliance. What does that actually mean on the ground?
Well, the source basically translates it as this. If a tech company doesn't want to give up equity, they can contribute money instead.
Money to what?
To local economic development projects, funding skills training, maybe supporting startup accelerators, building Wi-Fi towers in rural areas, that kind of thing.
So money instead of ownership.
That's the essence of it, yeah. Now, the source does note the South African communications minister denied this is all about Musk.
Oh, really? What's the official line?
The claim is it's just about making the country, generally more attractive for tech investment.
But the source is skeptical.
Highly skeptical, especially given the timing. The transcript keeps highlighting it. This proposal comes days after that messy meeting with Trump. The source really doubts it's a coincidence.
Doesn't sound like one.
And adding fuel to that fire, the source mentions these whispers. Reports that even before the Washington trip, President Ramaphosa might have already offered Musk some kind of quiet backroom deal.
A deal? To do what?
The suggestion is it was to try and smooth things over with the U.S. government, cool down the tensions.
Wow. Okay, so this potential policy shift, it feels pretty significant then.
Hugely. And to really get why, our source says you need to understand the history behind BEE.
Right, the context is crucial.
Absolutely. BEE wasn't just plucked out of thin air. It was set up as a direct response to, well, centuries of legalized theft and systemic exclusion, first under British colonial rule, then under apartheid.
Exclusion in what ways?
The transcript details how black South Africans were just deliberately locked out, prevented from earning land, running businesses, holding capital, basically participating in the economy beyond being cheap labor.
That's dark.
It is. And the source gives this staggering statistic. By 1994, when apartheid officially ended, the black majority controlled less than 2% of the country's entire economy.
Less than 2%. Wow, just think about that.
Exactly. Okay. So BEE, introduced in the early 2000s, was meant as a tool for redress, for transformation.
Not just about getting jobs, but actual ownership.
That was the core idea, yeah. Mandating investment in black ownership, skills, wealth creation, helping black South Africans actually own the means of production, build generational wealth. It was fundamentally about economic justice, equity.
Now, has BEE been perfect? Does the source address criticisms?
It does. Our source acknowledges the criticisms, arguments that implementation's been flawed, maybe it's been exploited by political elites sometimes, or hasn't reached the grassroots level effectively.
So flaws in how it's worked.
Yeah, flaws in the tool, as the source puts it. But, and this is crucial, the source argues the mission itself is not a failure. That mission of dismantling apartheid's economic legacy and building something more just, that remains urgent.
Okay, that distinction is important. Tool versus mission.
Very. So let's go back to this proposed equity equivalent compliance, this money instead of ownership idea.
What's the source's main concern with that?
The source argues this isn't just some minor update, it calls it a structural shift.
A shift that does what?
That fundamentally weakens the core principle of BAE, which is, again, about building ownership control, long-term wealth for black South Africans.
Because money for projects is different from actual equity stakes.
Precisely. The source makes the argument, development projects, they come and go. But ownership, actual equity, that builds generational power.
And the worry is setting a precedent.
Exactly. If you let one billionaire bypass the equity laws, the source asks, what stops others? It could open the floodgates.
So the source directly links this potential change to Musk and the U.S. pressure.
Directly. It asks again, why now? Why specifically for Musk? Why right after Trump's reported comments about so-called white genocide in South Africa?
In the conclusion?
The source basically says the dots are not that hard to connect.
Okay. And does the source see this as just a South African issue or part of something bigger?
Oh, definitely bigger. Our source broadens the view significantly here, linking it to what it describes as a wider global trend. It points straight to the U.S. context, specifically mentioning President Trump's campaign promises to dismantle diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, DEI.
Right. DEI has become a major focus in U.S. politics.
Exactly. And the transcript details actions taken during the Trump administration regarding federal DEI stuff like rescinding some previous actions, closing DEI offices in certain agencies, ending DEI hiring practices, warnings to states about funding.
Specific examples.
Yeah, it mentions the FBI closing its DEI office even before Trump took power, apparently, and a Department of Defense task force looking into these things.
And the private sector.
Well, the source notes that after Trump's election, it seemed like the private sector started following suit. It lists big names, Meta, McDonald's, Ford, others that canceled or scaled back their DEI programs around that time.
So what's the source's interpretation of all this?
It views it as a deliberate rolling back of DEI, an attempt to reframe any attempt to level the playing field as an attack on white people. Basically a rebranding of equity as extremism.
That's a strong interpretation.
It is. And here's the parallel the source draws. It claims the exact same arguments used against DEI in the U.S.
Arguments like
BEE is racist, or we're being excluded, or we just want a fair shot. Those arguments, the source says, are now creeping into the global South, including South Africa.
So the playbook is similar.
That's the argument. And the source highlights what it sees as a deep irony here.
Which is?
That countries, which historically built immense wealth through colonizing and excluding black and brown people, are now, as the source puts it, crying foul when those same populations ask for a real stake in their own economies.
Yeah, you can see the tension there.
Definitely. So the source's conclusion on this point is pretty stark. It sees the U.S. situation with Trump and DEI, Musk resisting ownership in South Africa, and the SA government considering this rule change
As all connected.
as all part of the same coordinated backlash against racial justice, in the source's words. Normalizing the idea that, billionaires get a free pass, while historically excluded groups are told, yet again, to just be patient.
Okay, that's a heavy conclusion. How is this playing out within South Africa itself? What are the reactions there, according to the source?
Well, our source says South Africans are watching this very closely, and feelings are, understandably, quite strong.
In what way?
Some people, the source notes, see this potential policy change as basically rewarding a billionaire tantrum.
A tantrum being rewarded.
Yeah, like the government is backpedaling on its own transformation laws just to please one super wealthy individual, while millions of its own citizens are still waiting for that promised economic equity.
You can see why that would cause anger.
Absolutely. The source really emphasizes the contrast. People literally fought and died for economic liberation there. BEE was meant to be this fundamental tool to address centuries of injustice.
And now the proposal feels like a step back.
The source argues it feels like the government is suggesting charity instead of ownership, calling it a discounted deal on justice.
What about the political reactions? Different parties saying different things.
Yes, our source outlines that. Apparently, some within the ruling party, the ANC, are trying to frame it more benignly, like it's just about encouraging tech growth.
But the opposition?
The EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, a major opposition party, are described as calling it a straight-up betrayal.
Strong words. Are they doing anything?
The transcript says they're threatening legal action, calling the potential decision unconstitutional, and basically arguing it compromises South Africa's sovereignty.
Okay. Do they have specific arguments against Musk or Starlink?
Yes, the EFF spokesperson is quoted making a pointed argument, questioning why Musk, who they claim pushes this false white genocide narrative about South Africa.
A narrative Musk has amplified, yeah.
Why would someone doing that be so desperate to invest there? The EFF suggests he uses that lie for leverage.
And contrasts him with
What they call a true humanitarian, who, if they believed such a thing was happening, would surely call for sanctions or disinvestment, not try to cut a deal.
That's a sharp point. Any other concerns from the EFF?
Yeah, according to the source, they also raised the alarm about tech colonialism.
Tech colonialism, meaning?
The fear that foreign tech companies get full control, extract all the profits, and leave South Africa with just, quote, scraps, disguised as development projects.
Are others concerned too? Beyond the EFF?
Yes. The source says civil society groups and policy experts are also worried, warning it could set a dangerous precedent and essentially hollow out BE from the inside.
But surely there's a counter-argument about the benefits of Starlink.
Oh, yes. The source acknowledges that. It mentions that some people emphasize the need for better internet, especially in rural areas. The potential for Starlink to transform access and drive innovation.
A classic development dilemma, perhaps. Progress versus principles.
Kind of, but
Yeah.
the source pushes back hard on that framing.
How so?
It asks, essentially, do we have to sell out economic justice just to get internet if the price is abandoning laws and principles people fought and died for?
And then maybe the price is too high.
That's the implication. The source suggests maybe we need to rethink who's benefiting from this so-called progress.
Okay, besides the BE issue, did the source mention other specific concerns about Starlink? You mentioned the EFF and others.
Yes, two big ones highlighted by the source. Potential threats to local industry and national security.
Right, let's take local industry first. What's the threat?
Well, the source points out there's basically zero indication Starlink plans to create any significant jobs in South Africa.
Because it operates remotely?
Exactly. It's based in the U.S. The worry is it could just come in and undercut the existing local telecom industry companies that do employ South Africans.
Did the source give any examples?
It mentioned MTN, a major South African telecom company, apparently raised exactly these concerns about job threats in a meeting, worries about a remotely run Starlink.
And the source's overall point
is that U.S. tech companies don't have a great track record of creating lots of jobs in South Africa, and there's no visible plan for Starlink to be different.
Okay, that covers local industry. What about the national security concerns? That sounds serious.
It does. The source links this back to Elon Musk himself and what it calls his alleged disinformation campaign against South Africa.
Related to the Israel-Palestine issue.
Yes, the claim in the source is that Musk uses the white genocide lie about South Africa specifically to try and delegitimize South Africa's stance and its ICJ case against Israel.
And the source provides evidence for this claim.
It mentions reports from American media outlets suggesting Musk might have even manipulated the AI function Grok on his platform, X, to push this specific white genocide narrative about South Africa.
Wow. Okay, so if that's the claim,
Then the source poses this really critical question. If Musk is allegedly running disinformation campaigns against the country, what's the risk when he potentially controls a big chunk of its communication infrastructure via satellite and has access to South African data?
yeah, that's a chilling question.
The source concludes pretty bluntly. This poses a national security risk that must be averted.
Okay, so we've got the BE conflict, the U.S. pressure, the local industry worries, the national security flags. How does the source tie this all together in terms of the bigger picture for Africa?
It frames this whole situation as a continental alarm bell. Seriously.
An alarm bell. Why continental?
Because South Africa, the source argues, is seen as perhaps the most legislatively advanced country in Africa when it comes to laws aimed at economic redress, like BEE.
So if they weaken their laws.
The message it sends to the rest of the continent, according to the source, is really damaging. It signals, hey, we're open for business, just bring enough cash to skip the rules.
And that sovereignty is maybe negotiable.
Exactly, that our sovereignty is negotiable if you're a powerful enough individual or corporation.
What's the risk there, according to the source?
That Africa's economic future becomes just a playground for foreign capital, where national laws are treated like suggestions and local populations, especially the historically marginalized, get pushed aside for progress.
And Starlink is just the first domino.
That's the prediction in the source. It won't be the last case. Other countries will likely face pressure to bend their rules, land laws, procurement rules, you name it.
And it'll all be framed positively.
Always. As innovation, growth, partnership. But the source argues it bypasses the core issues. Ownership, equity, accountability to the people.
Is there a deeper danger the source identifies?
Yes. The source talks about the risk of Africa essentially trading its sovereignty for tech access, prioritizing getting online over having agency and economic power.
Letting billionaires become.
The source uses the provocative phrase, new colonizers, maybe wearing Silicon Valley hoodies, creating a new kind of dependency coded into the technology itself.
That's a very strong warning.
It is. And the source concludes this section with a call for, well, clarity and unity, for bold policies across Africa focused unapologetically on empowering those historically shut out.
Arguing that the future needs to belong to Africa's people.
Not just be about getting faster internet. Yeah, that's the core argument. So wrapping this deep dive up, we've really unpacked how foreign pressure, powerful corporate interests, seem to be potentially pushing South Africa towards weakening laws that were specifically created to fix historical wrongs.
Yeah, the tension is palpable throughout the source material.
It really is. And our source leaves us, and you listening, with this central question. Should South Africa make this kind of exception for Elon Musk and Starlink?
Does that mission of economic transformation of justice still carry the same weight? Or is this a moment where perhaps power is being traded for a certain type of progress?
In a way that actually undermines justice, undermines sovereignty.
It's tough calculation.
It is. And the source leaves us with this thought. Justice isn't just some policy detail you can adjust on a spreadsheet. It's presented as a fundamental principle.
Something to really consider when these huge global forces bump up against national laws designed for redress for equity.
Absolutely. Lots to think about there. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.